The first rays of summer sunlight had barely crept over the suburban rooftops when Elena Martinez stood at her kitchen window, fingers wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee, her eyes burning with a mixture of frustration and determination. The Homeowners Association letter lay crumpled on the counter, a stark reminder of yet another dream crushed by bureaucratic nonsense. No in-ground pools allowed, she muttered, reading the words again in her mind. The pristine backyard that she had imagined would become a personal oasis now seemed like nothing more than a cruel joke. For months, Elena had poured her heart and savings into designing the perfect backyard retreat, sketching pool layouts, consulting with contractors, and dreaming of lazy summer afternoons floating under the California sun. But the HOA had other plans. Their letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic speak, citing everything from landscape preservation to community aesthetic standards. Each carefully worded paragraph was another nail in the coffin of her swimming pool dream. The neighborhood, they claimed, maintained a natural landscape integrity that her proposed pool would disrupt. Elena wasn't just any homeowner, though. As an environmental biologist with a decade of field research under her belt, she knew landscapes weren't meant to be static. They were living, breathing ecosystems waiting to be understood and respected. And if the HOA thought they could stop her from transforming her backyard, they had seriously underestimated her resolve. That morning, something shifted inside her. The rejection wasn't just about a swimming pool. It was about control, about rigid thinking that refused to see beyond manicured lawns and uniform suburban landscapes. Elena's professional life had been dedicated to understanding the delicate balance of ecosystems, to seeing potential where others saw only limitations. She pulled out her research notebooks, spreading them across the kitchen table. Years of fieldwork and wetland restoration projects danced across the pages. Detailed sketches of native plants, complex diagrams of water flow, meticulously documented interactions between soil, water, and local flora and fauna. What had started as professional research was about to become her most personal project yet. The backyard that the HOA wanted to keep pristine was actually a blank canvas. Clay-heavy soil, minimal drainage, and a slight depression that collected rainwater. These weren't limitations. They were opportunities. Elena realized she could create something far more valuable than a swimming pool, a functioning, beautiful wetland ecosystem right in the heart of suburbia. Her mind was already racing. Native sedges, rushes, and moisture-loving plants would transform the space. Species that could filter water, provide habitat for local wildlife, and create a miniature ecosystem that would be both scientifically fascinating and breathtakingly beautiful. The HOA wanted preservation. She would show them true preservation. By noon, Elena's kitchen table was covered in topographical maps, plant catalogs, and sketches. Her laptop displayed satellite images of her property, each potential planting area marked with colored pins. This wasn't just a garden project. This was an ecological statement. Little did the HOA know they hadn't denied Elena a pool. They had inadvertently sparked a revolution, one native plant at a time. The first weekend of transformation was nothing short of controlled chaos. Elena's backyard looked like a battlefield where nature was about to stage a magnificent comeback. Local nursery trucks rolled up her driveway, their cargo beds loaded with native plants that most suburban gardeners would barely recognize, sedges with razor-sharp edges, rushes with intricate root systems, and a collection of moisture-loving plants that looked more like scientific specimens than landscape decoration. Her neighbors watched with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Mark Thompson, the HOA board member who had personally signed the letter denying her pool permit, stood at his fence line, binoculars in hand, tracking her every move. Elena could feel his disapproving gaze, but she was beyond caring. Each shovelful of earth was a statement, each plant a declaration of ecological rebellion. This isn't just a garden, she muttered to herself, carefully positioning a cluster of yellow-eyed grass near a natural low point in the yard. This is an ecosystem in the making. The soil proved to be both her greatest challenge and most promising ally. Heavy clay that had once seemed like a landscaping nightmare now became the perfect foundation for her wetland design. Elena had spent years studying how different soil compositions could support unique ecological communities, and now she was about to put every ounce of that knowledge into practice. By midday, her friend and fellow biologist, Dr. Rachel Chen, arrived to help. Rachel brought specialized equipment, soil testing kits, pH meters, and a portable water quality analyzer that looked more like a piece of spacecraft technology than a gardening tool. "You're really doing this," Rachel said, a mix of admiration and disbelief in her voice. "Creating a functional wetland in the middle of suburbia. The research potential is incredible." Elena smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's more than research. It's a statement. Every square foot we can transform is a victory for ecological understanding." As they worked, Elena explained her vision. The wetland would be more than just a pretty landscape. It would serve multiple ecological functions, filtering water, providing habitat for local wildlife, creating a miniature ecosystem that could serve as both a personal sanctuary and a living laboratory. The first major challenge came unexpectedly. As they began to shape the landscape, they discovered an old drainage pipe partially buried near the property line. It was corroded, leaking, and potentially connected to the neighborhood's broader water system. What could have been a setback became another opportunity. "We can use this," Elena said, her eyes lighting up with the same passion that had driven her through countless field research projects. Controlled water flow is critical to a healthy wetland ecosystem. By sunset, the yard looked like a construction site crossed with a botanical research station. Temporary berms of soil, carefully marked planting zones, and a complex network of subtle drainage channels began to take shape. Mark Thompson was still watching, his disapproving stance now tinged with a hint of curiosity. Elena knew the real work was just beginning. Transforming a rejected pool site into a functioning wetland would take more than just weekend dedication. It would require patience, scientific precision, and an unwavering belief that nature could thrive anywhere, even in the most unlikely of places. The first month of Elena's wetland project brought unexpected challenges that tested her resolve more than any scientific expedition she'd ever undertaken. The HOA, initially dismissive, began to take notice. Complaints started trickling in, first as whispers, then as formal letters, then as heated neighborhood meetings. Mark Thompson, the HOA board member who had initially denied her pool permit, became her most vocal opponent. At a community gathering held in the local community center, he stood up with a rolled-up set of regulations, his face a canvas of suburban indignation. "This isn't a garden," he declared, pointing an accusatory finger toward Elena. "This is environmental anarchy." The room erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, while others looked intrigued. Elena remained calm, her years of presenting scientific research at international conferences serving her well. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, authoritative. "What I'm creating," she explained, "is a living ecosystem that provides more benefits to our community than a standard landscape yard. This wetland will naturally filter water, reduce irrigation needs, provide habitat for local wildlife, and serve as a living laboratory for urban ecological restoration." Rachel helped gather data to support Elena's claims. They documented every change, every new species that began to inhabit the emerging wetland. Dragonflies appeared where there was once only compacted clay. Native grasses sprouted in areas that had been barren. Water that once would have run off now slowly percolated, creating a miniature hydrological system. But bureaucracy rarely moves quickly, and the HOA was determined to fight back. They hired a landscape consultant to assess Elena's project, hoping to find some violation they could use to force her to restore the yard to its original condition. The consultant, a middle-aged woman named Karen Reynolds, arrived with a clipboard and a skeptical expression. She walked the property line, took soil samples, measured water flow, and checked every conceivable regulation. Elena knew this was a crucial moment. The scientific integrity of her project would be put to the test. What the HOA didn't anticipate was Elena's meticulous preparation. Every plant was carefully chosen, every drainage channel precisely calculated. Her background in environmental biology meant this wasn't just a passion project, it was a scientifically robust ecological intervention. As summer progressed, the wetland began to transform. What had started as a patch of clay and disappointment was becoming a vibrant, living ecosystem. Native birds began to appear, species that hadn't been seen in the neighborhood for years. A family of frogs took up residence near a carefully constructed shallow pool. Butterflies danced among the sedges and rushes. Neighborhood children began to take notice. They would stand at the fence, watching in wonder as Elena worked. Parents who had initially supported the HOA's complaints now started asking questions. Some even brought their kids over for impromptu ecology lessons. Mark Thompson's disapproval began to crack. One afternoon, Elena caught him peering over the fence, his binoculars no longer used for surveillance but for bird watching. The very ecosystem he had tried to prevent was proving to be something remarkable. "This is more than just a yard," Elena would later reflect. "It's a statement about what's possible when we work with nature instead of against it." The wetland was becoming a battlefield of ideas, suburban conformity versus ecological innovation. And Elena was determined to win, one native plant at a time. The turning point came unexpectedly during a record-breaking heatwave that transformed the neighborhood into a parched landscape of wilted lawns and stressed vegetation. While other yards turned brown and crisp, Elena's wetland pulsed with life, a green oasis that seemed to defy the brutal California summer. Local news caught wind of the story. A young environmental reporter named Jamie Rodriguez arrived with camera equipment, initially planning to cover what she thought would be a neighborhood dispute. Instead, she discovered something far more compelling, a living testament to ecological resilience. "This isn't just a garden," Jamie reported on the local evening news, her camera panning across the lush wetland. "It's a blueprint for sustainable urban landscaping." The broadcast changed everything. Water management experts from the local university began showing interest. The wetland became an unexpected case study in urban ecosystem restoration. Elena found herself fielding calls from landscape architects, environmental researchers, and even city planners curious about her innovative approach. Mark Thompson's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. The HOA board member, who had once been her staunchest opponent, now approached Elena with a mix of humility and genuine curiosity. During one particularly sweltering afternoon, he stood at the edge of her property, watching a group of children sketch the various plant species Elena had carefully cultivated. "I never thought I'd say this," Mark admitted, wiping sweat from his brow, "but your yard is keeping the entire street a few degrees cooler." The scientific data backed up his observation. Rachel had been meticulously collecting temperature readings, water retention measurements, and biodiversity counts. The wetland wasn't just aesthetically pleasing, it was a functional ecosystem that provided tangible benefits to the entire neighborhood. Water conservation became the most compelling argument. In a region struggling with drought, Elena's wetland demonstrated how thoughtful landscape design could dramatically reduce water usage. Native plants required minimal irrigation, while the carefully designed water management system captured and filtered rainwater more effectively than any traditional landscaping. Neighborhood dynamics shifted. What had started as a point of contention became a source of pride. Local schools began scheduling field trips to study the wetland. Elena found herself hosting educational workshops, teaching both children and adults about urban ecology, native plant species, and sustainable landscaping. The HOA, once Elena's primary antagonist, now faced internal pressure to reconsider their strict landscaping guidelines. Other homeowners began to look at their own yards with new eyes, wondering how they might incorporate elements of Elena's ecological approach. Rachel helped Elena document every step of the transformation. They prepared a comprehensive report that would become a landmark study in urban ecological restoration. What had begun as a personal protest against bureaucratic limitations had evolved into something far more significant, a living laboratory that challenged conventional thinking about suburban landscapes. As autumn approached, the wetland reached a new level of maturity. Migratory birds began to use it as a stopover, adding another layer of ecological significance. Elena would often sit on her back porch at sunset, watching the ecosystem she had nurtured come alive with the sounds of frogs, birds, and the gentle rustle of native grasses. "They denied me a pool," she would later say, "but I created something far more valuable." The wetland was more than just a triumph over bureaucracy. It was a radical act of environmental hope, a small patch of land that proved how innovation, science, and determination could transform even the most unlikely spaces into vibrant, living ecosystems. 2 years after the first shovel broke ground, Elena's wetland had become more than just a personal victory. It was a community landmark. The California Ecological Society awarded her a special recognition for urban ecosystem restoration, a moment that brought both tears and laughter to her eyes. The landscape that had once been a point of contention now served as a living model of ecological possibility. What began as a rejected pool project had transformed into a comprehensive environmental education center. Local schools established regular field trip programs with students learning about native ecosystems, water conservation, and biodiversity right in the heart of suburbia. Mark Thompson, once her most vocal opponent, now served as an unlikely ally. He had become so inspired by the wetland that he championed changes to the HOA guidelines, pushing for more environmentally sensitive landscaping approaches. The very regulations that had once been used to stifle innovation were now being rewritten to encourage ecological restoration. Rachel's research documentation had turned the wetland into an academic case study. Universities across the state used Elena's project as a prime example of urban ecological intervention. Researchers tracked the ecosystem's development, documenting the incredible biodiversity that had emerged from what was once a sterile suburban lot. The most unexpected outcome was the ripple effect throughout the neighborhood. Inspired by Elena's success, at least 7 neighboring properties had begun their own native plant restoration projects. What had started as a personal protest had become a neighborhood movement. During a community gathering to celebrate the wetland's 2nd anniversary, Elena reflected on the journey. The pool she had been denying had become something far more meaningful. Children who once played on manicured lawns now understood the intricate connections between water, soil, plants, and wildlife. Neighbors who had once viewed her as a troublemaker now sought her advice on sustainable landscaping. Sometimes, Elena told the gathered crowd, the biggest victories come from the most unexpected places. This wetland is more than just a garden. It's a testament to what happens when we choose understanding over uniformity, when we see potential where others see only limitations. The evening light caught the delicate ecosystem, dragonflies hovering over native sedges, frogs calling from carefully constructed shallow pools, birds threading through the intricate landscape. It was a living, breathing argument for ecological possibility. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the wetland, Alina knew her project was about more than just winning an argument with the HOA. It was about reimagining what was possible in urban landscapes. One small patch of land had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that with knowledge, passion, and persistence, transformation was always possible. The pool she never had became something far more profound, a window into a more sustainable, more connected way of living. Outside, the wetland hummed with life, a silent, powerful testimony to the beauty of working with nature, not against it.